Well, this is certainly a different experience for me that I have not really had that much experience with, but since that we're currently still in quarantine as of right now, I figure that now is the best time that it's better time than any time right now in terms of actually like getting my thoughts off and discussing a lot of things in terms of Philadelphia sports and the Sixers especially. Um, I haven't really considered making videos about this mainly because I'm not really that good at talking, and I figured like actually writing down my thoughts is a much better way to get across what I feel about certain topics in sports, especially about the Sixers, than making a video on it. But I figured, hey, might as well make one right now since that I'm not going anywhere. I have no plans, obviously, and unlike some people, I'm not afraid to show my face when I'm discussing anything Philadelphia sports related or criticizing anything Philadelphia sports related. So I'm just going to make this video because why not? Discussing my current feelings towards the Philadelphia 76ers. Now, I have been a fan of this team my entire life. Granted, I'm in my early 20s, but still, I've learned the history of this team and whatever. You can still be a great fan of a team if you're still young, and you can still experience heartbreak when you're still young, obviously, as well. But grew up watching Allen Iverson, still my favorite player of all time for the Sixers. Struggled through the process era, but I was still very optimistic to get through that, hoping that once that era was closed, we would be this great, amazing team that could compete for championships. And they still could be. They still could be a great team. It's just obviously frustrating right now, and we'll get to that pretty soon. But last year in 2019 against the Toronto Raptors, the Kawhi Leonard shot, the quadruple doink. That moment right there was the most heartbreaking moment I have ever experienced as a Philadelphia sports fan. I was obviously not born yet when Joe Carter hit the 1993 World Series game winning home run, and I was a toddler when Rodney Barber intercepted the pass off of McNabb to close out the vet. And while the 2011 NLDS against the Cardinals, the Phillies, that how they were over 100 wins, were favorites to win the World Series, and they just went out in the first round in the NLDS. That was obviously painful, but it was not nearly as painful as what happened in 2019 with that shot. And since the team is currently very, very frustrating and very, very in a very much in a pact of underachieving right now, I feel like it's a very important for me to actually get out my thoughts and feelings towards them in words as of right now. So this team went into this season with very high expectations. Some people, in fact, a good portion of people, not just a small pocket of people, a lot of people predicted that they would usurp the Milwaukee Bucks to be the number one seed in the Eastern Conference, and they had a great chance of making the NBA Finals and a reasonable chance of winning an NBA title in 2020 season, going up against either the Lakers, the Clippers, heck, maybe the Nuggets, but I digress. But yeah, that was the legit expectations of this team. Some people were pegging them to win 60 games, and throughout this entire season, this team has had one obstacle after the next get in their way, through a mixture of bad coaching, underachieving, and granted some bad luck as well. Like this team has not really had much time to get actually play with one another, and that's been an issue for a very long time. The starting five of Ben Simmons, Josh Richardson, Tobias Harris, Al Horford, who's not really in the starting five at this point, and Joel Embiid, they didn't really play much together. They only had, correct me if I'm wrong, like only around 10 games where they all were in the starting lineup at the same time. Might not even be that, but it's just hard to get any chemistry with a team when you're not playing well with one another and not even playing with one another at all. So, but overall, the main thing I have to say about this team is you just have to, at this point, bite the bullet and do the right thing and fire Brett Brown. And with this season suspension, I'm not even sure if they're going to bring back the NBA playoffs at this point. But at this point in the season, knowing how badly the team underperformed and how frustrating they were, you have to realize that Brett Brown has been a big issue with this team for a very long time. It's not just now. You can argue in 2019, one of the main reasons why Toronto managed to beat the 76ers is because Nick Nurse put in a better game plan and Brett Brown managed to just outcoach him. I mean, Kawhi Leonard by far was the best player of that series, without a doubt. Kawhi Leonard was an absolute monster of that series, a god amongst men during that series. But I would still say the Sixers overall had a more talented roster than the Raptors did. And you can seriously make the argument that the Sixers had 4 of the top 5 players in that series. Granted, you can say that Pascal Siakam is better than Tobias Harris or Lowry is better than Harris, but still, the Sixers, I would say overall, had a much higher amount of talent on their roster than the Raptors, and yet they still managed to lose. And in 2018, Brad Stevens completely destroyed Brett Brown, and that was the main reason why they lost that series. So it's not just now, but if you watch any Sixers game now, you understand how Brett Brown is clearly out of touch in terms of running this team. He doesn't want to put Embiid down low for whatever reason. His play calling in some situations is just like, what are you even thinking? Like, what? Why would you make that play call in that certain position? Out of bounds calls late in games. He just wants to give the ball to the wrong person. And it often results in turnovers most of the time. I remember distinctively a game against the Miami Heat earlier this year where Eric Spoelstra very early on in the game decided to go to zone defense to combat the Sixers and their size. And Brown didn't do anything. He didn't do anything to adjust to the what Spoelstra was doing. He just said, "Hey guys, let's just go run the same thing that we were doing the entire time, and let's not make any adjustments whatsoever." And it's obvious at this point that, like, I'm not a member of the team. I'm not a member of the locker room. I don't know what exactly is going on, and I don't claim to know what's going on. But if you look at the body language of everyone on this team, it's pretty easy to see that they don't really believe in what Brett Brown's saying to them anymore. They really don't respect the guy anymore. They might like him as a person, and nothing against Brett Brown as a person. I think he's a very good man, but I don't really see him any real future of him being around on this team anymore. And for the sheer fact that Brett Brown was not hired by the 76ers initially to win. He was hired in 2013 because he was a guy who has had a lot of experience coaching as an assistant coach for the San Antonio Spurs and a veteran coaching presence that could guide a bunch of guys who were just going to lose all the time. A bunch of G League guys, a bunch of guys who should be playing in the Euro League, just being brought on to lose. And Brett Brown was just basically there to be a moral support. Just guys saying, "Hey, just don't worry about it. We're not we might suck, but you're still good." Like, he wasn't hired by the 76ers to be like a legitimate coach. He wasn't hired by the 76ers to be a real coach. He was hired to just be a guy who just was like a real legitimate name, like not like someone that can actually lead the team when they had talent to actual victories. So he was mainly hired to be a guy that he could just coach the team when they were bad, and then a real coach could come in when they actually had enough talent to actually compete. And if you look at it this way, look what happened to the Miami Bucks when they fired Jason Kidd and hired Mike Budenholzer. They're pretty much the same roster, only they were transformed from like a team that was like 6th or 7th seed ish to a team that is by far the best team in the Eastern Conference. And you can look at the Toronto Raptors. Dwayne Casey was there for a very long time. They fired Dwayne Casey and they promote Nick Nurse, and look what happened to them. 2019 NBA champions. And of course you can say, "Oh, that's not fair because Kawhi Leonard wasn't on the team when Dwayne Casey was the coach." Well, granted, yeah, that's a fair assessment, but honestly, I don't feel like if Dwayne Casey was the coach of the Raptors in 2019 that they would have won the NBA championship. I feel like they need to get some fresh blood in there in order to move on and capitalize on all the talent they've had for so long. And even now, the Raptors are still a good team. A lot of people like just wrote them off after Kawhi left, and they're somehow still a great team, a much better team than the 76ers, which is a huge insult, which is a huge like mark against the Sixers, that the fact that the Raptors are still a better team than they are, even though Kawhi Leonard is no longer there. So I just think that the message with Brett Brown has run dry. And to be blunt, a lot of people said this about Andy Reid in the early 2010s, but I am just sick of just seeing this guy on the sideline as the 76ers head coach at this point. I'm just sick of looking at him. I'm sick of like hearing the same things over and over again. I'm sick of the same boring style of play that he pushes these guys to run. I'm sick of all his like stereotypical responses to the media after games, and I'm sick of his like traitorous Boston accent with his dumb like cliches that he always spits all the time. I just think that the message is drawn dry with Brett Brown, and I feel like it's just time to move on from him. And what I fear about this is that our owner, Josh Harris, and the other like dozens of owners who have partial stake in the team, they're going to come together and say, "Oh, we didn't actually get to see the full potential of the Sixers. Let's give Brett Brown one more chance," even though he honestly should have been fired after 2018. So I just feel like it's time to move on from the guy. It truly is. I know there's some people in Philadelphia who love Brett Brown. I don't know why. I just feel as though that he needs to go, and we can bring in anybody, like any new coach with fresh blood, a new message to the locker room. Because I feel like the locker room, as of right now, does not believe in a guy, and it's time for a change. Jimmy Butler said it on JJ Redick's podcast how when he arrived with the Sixers in late 2019, no, or late 2018, like in the early stages of the 2018-19 season when he was traded from Minnesota to the Sixers, that he had no clue who was even in charge with the Sixers. He remembers going to a film room session and he had no clue what was even going on because it was just they were there for 2 hours. No one spoke up about anything, and that was just it. It would just seem like a very unorganized locker room, and no one really seems to know who's in charge anymore. And everyone wants to say, you got to trade Embiid or you got to trade Simmons in order for the team to reach their full potential. How about you fire Brett Brown and bring in a legitimate, real winner coach? It could be Mark Jackson, even though he's been in the broadcast booth. I would still like Mark Jackson as the coach. It could be Kenny Atkinson, who brought a nothing Nets team to the playoffs last year and gave the Sixers a scare in the first round. But I don't know. Like this Sixers team in this whole season has been a very difficult time. But I just wanted to get that out there because I just wanted to put my thoughts into words that I can speak on camera for the first time in over 2 years. My first video making like about like current events that's not just a school project that I did and just for whatever reason just kept on my channel. But hopefully things in terms of the Sixers get better, and hey, I might make a few more videos if this one does well enough. If you disagree with me, feel free to write in the comments and saying how much my opinion sucks or how much you disagree with me. I might have made you angry with one of my takes before, but that's fine. It's YouTube. That's how it works here. So yeah, and hopefully this whole virus ends pretty soon, so we can actually start watching sports again. That is actually a means for entertainment. So yeah, just wanted to get those thoughts out there. I might make another video. Who knows? But yeah, signing off now.